From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's coming up. In a few moments, we'll welcome in K-State's Terry Griffin and a cooperating researcher from the Arkansas Colleges of Health Education, LaVona Traywick. They teamed up on a recent study of variable rate fertilizer applications and why farmers have been slow to adopt that technology over the many years that it's been around. There are both economic and generational components to their findings. This research says a great deal about how the differing farming generations embrace precision technology. Quite interesting results, and we'll cover them with Terry and LaVona next. And later, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven is back with another Stop, Look, and Listen. That's what's ahead on this Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
We're glad to have you tuned in for this midweek edition of Agriculture Today. First today, it's into the area of precision agriculture, and our two guests have co-authored a new article that looks at variable rate technology, its adoption over the years, and the factors that have determined a farmer's receptiveness to the technology. We'll explain further with our guests. Terry Griffin, you know, he is a precision agricultural economist with K-State Research and Extension, and accompanying Terry virtually, a gerontologist from the Arkansas Colleges of Health Education. LaVona Traywick is along with us, and we'll explain her role as we go along. Terry, first of all, the basic initiative here with this paper and what you were trying to accomplish, it focused on variable rate fertilizer applications, and we'll let you take it from there.
Sure, Eric. So we've got a lot of evidence, not only here in Kansas from the Kansas Farm Management Association, KFMA, that many of the agriculture technologies do not yet have 100% adoption for all farms. And these statistics are mirrored at the national level by the USDA Economic Research Service. They were using the ARM survey that many farmers are familiar with, the Agricultural Resource Management Survey that they complete. They ask some questions about technology, and those results at the national level say the same thing, that less than half of farms are using variable rate fertilizer. And so the question is, if the technology is so great and it works so well, then why isn't everybody using the technology? Why does it not have 100% adoption rate? So that's why we started looking into the demographics of farm decision makers today and trying to make a forecast for those decision makers and what their demographics will be in 5 and 10 years.
And what makes these statistics so interesting is that people working in the farm industry know that not all farmers are using these technologies. But people in the general public, they hear about, variable rate fertilizer application. All farmers must be using that because it's going to be so much better for the environment. It's going to save them money, all these things that we hear. And so general population is under the assumption that all farmers are, when in truth, all farmers are not.
We need to note for folks that you have had extensive interactions yourself with producers professionally on why they do certain things as far as their farming activities. So, Terry, how did you and LaVona go about trying to pin down why this adoption rate of variable rate fertilizer applications has been so low, surprisingly so?
LaVona and I have been discussing this issue in one form or another for the last 15 years. And we started at University of Arkansas together as extension specialists. And given that we were in the same incoming class of extension specialists, we asked, how can we work together? What's some common overlap? And so since LaVona was a gerontologist focusing on the aging process, on elderly individuals, and I was focused on ag technology. We looked at how aging farmers, or maybe some farmers that may have had some injuries to their neck, back, shoulders, would use technologies like automated guidance that would improve their quality of life. Maybe not from a dollars economics perspective, but from a utility maximization economics perspective. And so I was challenged last year to describe why variable rate technology, which is nearly plug and play in some instances if you have on the go. Example is the Oklahoma State University has developed a green secret to apply variable rates of nitrogen on the go in wheat. Why isn't the adoption levels nearly 100%? And so with the KFMA database, we could see the age and the demographics of the farm operation, if there were multiple operators, if it was a sole proprietor, and the ages of everybody who has management responsibilities on that farm. Well, the really interesting thing about that is we were seeing some drastic differences by age, which were expected, wasn't anything new. But one of the things I thought was kind of eye-opening, but it makes perfect sense looking back, is that farms with multiple operators tended to have more technology than sole proprietor farms, regardless of age of the sole proprietors. And so we started looking at the financial aspects, and it kind of makes sense that older, more established farm operators may have financial resources that younger Gen Z millennials may not have access to, although the Gen Z millennial farm operators may be the ones who desire technology. Put them both together in the same operation, that operation tends to have more technology. Well, that's when I enlisted LaVona's help to help me. As an economist, I'm trained to do economics and farm management. I am not trained to describe the social aspects of the aging process.
So let's bring LaVona in, and we'll address that right now, these generational differences in technology adoption. Your perspectives on that as you worked on this project?
Well, one of the cost of using variable rate fertilizer is human capital. And I don't think enough emphasis gets placed on that, because it's the brain power, it's the time, it's the effort that goes into using these technologies. And when you're talking about your older farmer, if you're talking about your baby boomers or even your silent generation, you have to look at, they've been doing farming for a really long time, and it's been productive for them. And to make a change, you have to look at that cost benefit. Is it going to be worth the time and effort that it takes in order to make the change to use that new technology? But also with that human capital, you have to think about the brain power it takes to learn something new. The normal processes of aging is that we tend to slow down a little bit, and it takes us longer to process. That's normal aging. Dementia, on the other hand, is a disease process, but slowing down, taking longer to process is normal aging. So if I look at this device, it's going to save me time, but I have all this time that I have to learn how to use this device. Is it worth it to use the time in order to use the device? Do I really need to use this new technology?
Well, then, looking at this going forward with the next generation, one would think and presume then, and this is projecting a bit here, but those millennials and generations beyond would be more inclined, Terry and LaVona, either of you can weigh in on this, more inclined to adopt something like variable rate fertilizer applications, which do require the brain input, to put it that way, to at least initially employ those technologies.
Human capital doesn't necessarily have to be on the farm operation itself. It could be crop consultants or at the retailer. Someone within arm's length of the farm needs to have the human capital, not only the capacity, but the willingness to devote that human capital to that project. And a lot of farms would tell us that they would rather devote that extra effort to other types of management right now. And so looking forward, I would think that we would asymptotically approach some 90+% of farms and acres at some point in the future, but not with the current set of operators we have today in 2020. So once the millennials and Gen Zs become majority of the farm operators, then I would expect that we would come to some plateau at a high level. However, it's not a slam dunk from there. Gen Zs are a different set of decision makers than even the millennials and Gen X, because not only were they born with the internet, they're used to things working now seamlessly. And if there's any hiccups, LaVona can speak more to how the Gen Zs respond to technology not working properly.
Go ahead, LaVona, because that's an interesting dynamic here. The Gen Zs, as Terry's describing them, may not have the level of patience that other generations in the past have had.
Yes.
What?
So Dr. Mark Taylor, who does a lot of research on generations, he explained it the best I ever heard anyone say. We, in my generation and older, we've all heard the phrase as easy as 1, 2, 3, right? Easy as 1, 2, 3. Generation Z, it needs to be as easy as 1. Let that sink in a minute. Right?
Interesting way to put it.
Generation Z, we as Generation Z don't want to do 3 steps. We want to hit 1 step and have it work. And so they have very, very different preferences when it comes to media, when it comes to electronics, than even the millennials do. And that's why they are such an interesting generation to look at. They are so tech savvy that they have become very picky, and they want a good financial value for their choices.
Interesting. Well, LaVona and Terry, we need to step aside for a couple of moments. Then we'll continue our conversation with K-State's Terry Griffin and from the Arkansas Colleges of Health Education, LaVona Traywick, co-authors of a new analysis of farmer adoption patterns of variable rate cropping technology. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
Man, it's hot out here. Heat stress affects more than just humans. It also affects livestock. Extreme heat, humidity, wind speeds, and cloud cover all make a difference in air temperature. To control problems, make sure your livestock have shade and water provided at all times. This will help prevent problems in breeding, meat production, and reduce chances of death. Please take all these into consideration for livestock production. Brought to you by K-State Animal Science Leadership Academy participants.
Agriculture Today is back now as we're visiting with K-State precision agricultural economist Terry Griffin and his research colleague from the Arkansas Colleges of Health Education, LaVona Traywick. They've just finished a study of variable rate technology adoption trends with the focus on fertilizer applications. And Terry, before we go any further, you and LaVona have been referring to the differences in farming generations pertinent to this subject. You might want to define further those generations so we're all on the same page on this.
Correct. Generation Z would have been born 1997 would be the oldest one. So they're just now entering the workforce, coming out of the college years. So that's kind of early to mid-20s is the break point between millennials and Gen Z. And millennials were born between 1980 and 1996. And today in Kansas, our KFMA stats suggest that over half of farm operations are ran by baby boomers. They're still in control of over half, although that number is gradually decreasing over time. And our paper does give a little forecast about how LaVona and I speculate that we'll see some structural adjustments such that we believe that Generation Z and millennials may surpass Generation X sooner than what the trend lines are suggesting because of generational skipping and because a lot of the boomers who have not yet became the sole decision maker on those farms will be retirement age before they get full control. And so we're expecting Gen X and millennials to fill that void before boomers become even a higher percentage.
So the average age of farmers is going up at the same rate as the average life expectancy. And because of that, the farmers are working longer. And as they're working longer, the silent generations, the baby boomers, Generation X, which is my generation, I'm not being able to take over control because my parents are still alive and they're still working and they're still having the control. So by the time they finally say, okay, I'm ready, I'm going to retire, they're going to be 85. I'm going to be 65. Well, it's time for me to retire too. So that's that whole skipping a generation is what is really going to happen as farmers continue to get older and still work.
These are really intriguing dynamics to think about as these generations roll forward and who will be farming in the next 20 years, whatever it might be. Want to, though, circle back to the analysis from the economic perspective, Terry. Don't want to let you off the hook here completely. LaVona mentioned that one of the three costs of variable rate fertilizer applications was, in fact, the human capital investment and requirements. But there are actual numbers involved here, too, in as far as other costs to that adoption or lack of adoption of that technology.
Sure. Yeah. So when we look at the benefit cost analysis of variable rate applications, the literature goes back 3 decades. And the really interesting thing about the literature is that it's largely inconclusive. And to sum it up, variable rate technology is profitable some fields, some years, and some time. So it's not necessarily, the literature doesn't say it works for everybody at the same time. So for instance, as an extreme example, a herbicide performs pretty consistently if the environmental conditions and growth stage of weeds and so forth are within reason. Variable rate technology isn't that way. The technology, the mechanics of it, the engineering of it works consistently. The yield response to different rates, there's agronomic data to support that. But one of the things that I've really found that impacts my farm recommendation on this is that, okay, it depends not only on the what and the where, but also on the who. If the farm decision maker is not willing to devote the human capital to make these things work, then it's not going to be operational for them, and therefore it's not going to be profitable for that particular farm. So it depends on the who. It's one of these technologies that not only the where and the what, but also on the who.
Mm-hmm. And there are other specifics to this, such as the upcharge for variable rate fertilizer applications that factor into an individual's decision, perhaps irrespective of generation here.
University of Nebraska has a survey, and then they've reported what service providers are charging for uniform applications of product as well as variable rate application of dry product. And the difference between the two isn't that much. I mean, it's less than a bushel of corn at the current cheap prices. So it's not a huge amount of service fee increase, and I don't believe that is prohibiting farmers from adopting. I think it has more to do with that level of human capital that's being willing to be devoted. But our paper does talk about something else. It talks about risk. Mm-hmm. And each generation has a different risk preference. Okay, so one thought is if I apply uniform rates across the whole field, then I will be probably correct in so many locations within the field. It's kind of like the idea of a broken clock is correct twice a day, right? But let's say I try to do a variable rate application. There's a good chance that I may be wrong, or at least not exactly right, everywhere in that field. So why would a very risk-averse decision maker pay a fee in order to increase their probabilities of not being correct? So there's a risk component as well that we bring out in this paper.
And there's one more component that would be worth mentioning, and LaVona, that would have to do with generational differences in as far as, to put it this way, environmental conscientiousness. In other words, younger generations may be more attuned to the environmental advantages, if you will, of variable rate vis-a-vis a uniform rate of fertilizer application. You might speak to that.
Yes. And so not saying that Generation X and older don't care about the environment,
right,
but as a generation, starting with millennials, they are very conscious about the environment. They really care about possible runoff, overuse of fertilizer, trying to reduce chemicals in the environment, reduce chemicals in our food, wanting to find different ways in order to reduce the environmental footprint, their carbon footprint on society. And so that is something as a generation, the millennials, and even more so with Generation Z, is very conscious of. And that is not something that we have really seen as a determining factor in using variable rate fertilizer up until the millennials.
Well, this is a multi-layered analysis. That's why we've devoted a fair amount of time to it on the broadcast today. Terry, what do you hope in the ultimate will be the take-home from this as you are now submitting this for publication and hopefully for reporting publicly here soon?
Sure, yeah. We've got a conditional acceptance to a farm management journal that we look forward to having this published soon. My recommendation here is I meet a lot of farms who tell me that they feel like they are behind the curve because they do not have all technologies that are available to them. And I want the takeaway to be is that, one, not all farms have all technology. Two, not all farms should have all technology. And this is going to not only depend on where they are and what they produce and what type of soil that they have and environmental conditions, but it's also a function of if the farm operation does not have human capital that can be applied to the problem. So whether that human capital is at the retailer, a crop consultant, or one of the farm operators on the farm, if they're not able or willing or able to devote human capital to make some of these technologies work, then that's their answer, that they should not be adopting and trying to force things to work. You know, it's the idea is that we mentioned quality of life earlier. Not all technologies increase the quality of life for all users. Some technologies do, but not all technologies. So if a farm is feeling like they are behind the curve because they don't have everything, my recommendation to them is take a deep breath, relax, think about it, and if they're not willing or able to have human capital devoted to making higher technologies work, then they shouldn't.
Well, a number of interesting talking points that are emerging from the work that you and LaVona have put together here. And thanks to the two of you for joining us on the broadcast today. We appreciate very much your time.
Thanks, sir. It's always a pleasure.
Glad to be here.
Along with K-State Precision Agricultural Economist Terry Griffin is LaVona Traywick. She's a gerontologist by profession with the Arkansas Colleges of Health Education and has had extensive experience working with farmers on such topics as what we've been discussing today, that is adoption of variable rate technology for fertilizer applications. And we'll be back with more here on Agriculture Today.
Make hand washing a healthy habit everywhere you go. Wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, especially after going to the bathroom, before, during, and after preparing food, and before eating. If soap and water aren't available, use a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol. Life is better with clean hands. A message from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
You're listening to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network, now in our 96th year of broadcast service to agriculture in Kansas and the Central Plains. Eric Atkinson with you. On to today's agricultural news headlines now, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, the USDA has extended the deadline for applications for the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, or CFAP, until September the 11th, and it's added more commodities to the eligibility list. The changes are scheduled to be published in the Federal Register notice on Friday. Here's more from the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
USDA has again identified additional commodities that are eligible for payments under the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program.
We approached it from a NOFA process, Notice of Funds Availability, and that was an opportunity for the public to submit data to verify that additional commodities were impacted.
That was Farm Service Agency Administrator Richard Fordyce. Similar to an earlier announcement in July of additional eligible commodities, many of those added to the list this time also included specialty crops. A complete list can be found online.
Farmers.gov/CFAP will be a great resource for folks to look at. It'll have the added commodities listed on there, and then also it'll have some instructions and some more information about how a producer can apply.
The deadline to apply for the program has been extended until September 11th, 2020. Meanwhile, producers with approved applications will receive their final payments. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Now, the USDA has distributed $7 billion in CFAP funds so far. That is less than half of the $16 billion set aside for the program, and it has accepted to date 522,000 applications, according to the department. The deadline for applications was originally set for August the 28th, but as many as 28 farm groups wrote the Trump administration asking for that deadline extension, saying that some producers still don't know about the program or how to apply for it. The list of new commodities eligible includes liquid eggs. That's an industry hit hard by the closure of restaurants and other food service establishments. All sheep and many aquaculture fish are now included, as well as nursery crops and flowers. A score of other specialty crops were added to that eligibility list. About one-third of Iowa's estimated 30 million acres of cropland were hit hard by the derecho storm on Monday. Iowa Secretary of Agriculture Mike Naig said yesterday that extensive damage was inflicted to about 10 million acres in the central part of that state. An estimated tens of millions of bushels of commercial grain storage damaged or destroyed, along with millions of bushels of on-farm storage likewise. At this point, Naig said there are no reported livestock losses. There has been, however, damage to livestock buildings. The hardest hit area of the state included a wide swath from central Iowa, northwest of Des Moines, to east central Iowa, east of Des Moines to the Illinois border. State climatologist there, Justin Gleason, said the central part of the state was in a severe drought prior to the inch to inch and a quarter rainfall from the derecho. Gleason said the beneficial moisture was, of course, nullified by the damaging winds. And that state recorded a high wind gust of 106 miles per hour near La Grande. That was followed by a 99-mile-per-hour gust near Marshalltown. The derecho held together for 14 hours and 770 miles. As is the case in Iowa, officials in Illinois continue to assess the damage left by the storm, and a spokesperson for the Indiana Department of Agriculture told DTN that state continues to assess the damage. The U.S. and China are working jointly now on the investigation of those mass shipments of unsolicited garden seeds from China. The USDA's Gary Crawford has more.
Who in China has been sending thousands of packets of free and unsolicited garden seeds to people in the U.S. and other countries, and why? Are these seeds themselves possible invasive plants or weeds, or are they carrying problematic pests or diseases we don't have in the U.S.? Well, on that last question, USDA experts have been checking over some of those seeds. Have they found anything ominous?
No, we have not, really.
But Osama El-Lissi with the USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service says they've only been able to check a small percentage of the thousands and thousands of seed packets that have been delivered. Meanwhile, he says, USDA officials are working with their counterparts in China
to figure out who's actually sending those shipments and, more importantly, stop future shipments.
USDA also working with Customs and Border officials in the U.S. to try to
intercept any future packages being shipped to the United States.
He says if you've got one of these packets, don't plant the seeds, seal it up, send it to your State Department of Agriculture. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
The three main functions of the beef checkoff are education, promotion, and research. Scarlett Hagens tells us here that the Kansas Beef Council recently incorporated two of those three during a training where new beef-centered curriculum was introduced to educators.
The Kansas Beef Council recently hosted an educational training session during the Kansas Association for Career and Technical Education virtual conference. The webinar focused on equipping educators with science-based information and providing tools to help dispel common beef nutrition and production-related misconceptions. During the training, Kansas Beef Council staff demonstrated two new checkoff-funded, teacher-developed curriculums for middle school and high school STEM and family and consumer science classes. Both aim to offer students a greater understanding of beef production and include interactive learning options about the beef life cycle and the role of beef in a healthy and sustainable diet. Checkoff-funded curriculum like these create greater beef literacy that can lead to more in-depth investigations and activities that help keep the conversation going about the journey of beef from pasture to plate. This checkoff-funded program is just one part of the Kansas Beef Council's Greater Nutrition Outreach Program that seeks to disseminate science-based information to consumers showing how beef fits within a healthy and active lifestyle. Kansas Beef Council staff routinely interact with leading dietitians and health influencers through seminars like Nutrition Adventure and the annual Dietetic Intern Media Training workshops that focus on educating health influencers using peer-reviewed beef research. I'm Scarlett Hagens.
And this quick reminder for you cattle producers about the first of those two Kansas Livestock Association, Kansas State University, Ranch Management Field Days. It'll take place tomorrow near Smith Center at W&S Ranch. That is owned and operated by the Weltmer family. A look at leveraging genetics to achieve cow herd objectives, managing and planning for tough economic times, optimizing gain with post-weaning nutrition, and combating farm stress among the topics there. It'll start with registration 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. To find out more details, go to KLA.org. That's KLA.org. You're tuned to Agriculture Today.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
It is those kind of stories which are the beginning of legends.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
My youngest son said a few years ago, "Papje, when you're gone, all I really want is your desk and some of your bookcases filled with the books you love." Another son, Ian, once said when he was still small, "When Pops is gone, we will roll him up in the Persian rug and hang him on the wall." That was many years ago. I'm still kicking and doing well. Admittedly, I have slowed down. But it is those kind of stories which are the beginning of legends. Stories told and enlarged upon. Martine is right. I love books. They hold stories and true happenings. Here's a story which intrigued me. It is an old Czech legend. And I wonder if in any of the old Czech families this story is ever told, retold, as it is still a very wise story we can learn from. It is the story told of King Swartepluk. Swartepluk was born around 840. He governed part of Monrovia. He fought many battles, expanded his territory. He ruled with a strong hand. When he realized he was getting older and would soon die, he called his 3 sons to him. He told them and reminded them how during his life he had fought and ruled to keep the kingdom together and even expand it. and he said it would now be up to them to rule together and move forward. But he said, before you go, I need to tell you something. Zwartepluk spoke to one of his attendants, who left and quickly returned with 3 small branches. The sons, now grown, recognized them as whips the father had used when the sons were small and needed a spanking. The sons looked at their father, but he smiled. He took the whips and showed his sons how easily they bent and broke when held separately. The king then told the servant to bundle the 3 branches, 1 branch for each son. The servant did as told and tightly and carefully bundled the whips into 1 thicker branch. Then the king sat up straight and said, I worry about you, worry that all the 3 of you want to do is make trouble and fight amongst yourselves. Where there is fighting, there is weakness. And if the kingdom is perceived as being weak, the neighbors will invade and overpower us and destroy what I have built up. However, if the 3 of you will stand together, you will be strong, and the kingdom will prosper. Then the king lay down for a moment, tired. After a moment of rest, he told his servant to give his now bundled branches to his oldest son. And King Zwartepluk asked each of his sons to try to break the bundled branches. They tried. They tried hard because they were strong. But hard as they tried, they could not break the now thicker branch. Then the king said, now remember this lesson. It is the lesson of cooperation, working together. If you work together in peace and with goodwill toward each other, you will be strong, and no one will conquer the kingdom. The servant then untied the bundle, and the king gave each of his sons a branch. Without any difficulty, each of the 3 sons broke the branch given to them. Remember, the king said, here too is a lesson. Just as you broke your single branch, so the kingdom will fall apart if you do not want to work together. Soon afterwards, the old king died. The sons soon forgot the words and warning of their father. They started to fight amongst themselves, and the enemies made the most of the given opportunity. The kingdom fell apart. It's an old story. It's a Czech story. But the message and warnings apply to many situations. For us in Kansas, it may be a farm started as one family operation by the father or grandfather who immigrated. Kansas is rich in early settlements by immigrants coming from different countries. It makes Kansas culturally rich. According to the Kansas Historical Society, the first Bohemian settlers in Wilson was Francis Yisuela, who arrived on May 16, 1874, with Seska Osada painted on the side of his wagon. Seska Osada means, and I'm reading it, Czech settlement. He advertised that land was good, plenty of water, and there was stone to build with. I like the reference to building stone, readily available. The result was, between 1875 to 1910, immigrants of Czech descent settled around Wilson. In 1877, a group of settlers came directly from Europe and settled mostly in Lincoln County, rich in limestone, even for fence posts, so typical for that part of our state. When I think about the legend of King Zwartepluk and realize how old it is, the 800s, you think how many generations might have benefited from it if they listened. It's the kind of legend told around a warm open fire, dogs laying around. But it's also a story to share in today's world, not only for farm families passing on the land, but there are other enterprises where it applies as well.
Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. It's good to have you along with us once more, and please be back right here tomorrow, if you will, where we'll talk pre-plant weed control for wheat ground. K-State's Sarah Lancaster along for that visit, and a look at developing wildlife habitat on one's place with tree plantings. K-State's Thad Rhodes will be aboard. That tomorrow. Meantime, take advantage of our podcast service. You'll find out more about that at agtoday.net, agtoday.net. Eric Atkinson bidding you a good day for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.